Patty Krieger. Patty Krieger went trekking on Sauk Mountain, which is close to Rockport, Washington, with her dog, Bear. Larry Lee Presley, their lover, and a handful of his family members were also with them. Larry and his family said they were on top of the mountain to disperse the ashes of their late parents, who had died a few months earlier. They claimed that Bear and Patty followed a separate route. They expected the trails to intersect. Bear and Patty did not appear at the bottom. Larry and his family went to the grocery shop to get food instead of waiting. They went back to the mountain after 4 hours, and only then did they report Patty missing. Larry claimed to be Patty's family to the police for an unknown purpose. This implied that Patty's biological family was not informed of her absence right away. Her manager informed her son Alan after she failed to show up for work the following day. Larry refused to let Alan inside his mother's home, despite Alan's best efforts. Interestingly, Patty's phone was in the possession of one of Larry's buddies, and the offender had both Patty's driver's license and keys. Larry drove her automobiles around town instead of his own, and he destroyed everything she owned inside the house. Additionally, he and his family were not collaborating. She confided in a co-worker that she was afraid Larry might harm her less than a month before she vanished. Every day, Patty's relatives witnessed searches in the mountains for her. They really believed that Larry was involved in her disappearance. Moving on to the next case. Laura Ann Huizar. Judy Marie Huizar and Jose Luis Huizar welcomed Laura Ann Huizar into the world on May 10, 1972. At the age of 11, she was abducted, subjected to sexual assault, and ultimately slain violently while she was a 6th grader at Chester Amer Elementary School. On Sunday, November 6, 1983, about 1:30 p.m., Laura disappeared while traveling home from a friend's home in St. Lucie County, Central Florida. Her last known location was 2G's Market. She was carrying an armful of garments as she made her way home after spending the night at a friend's place. Her parents called the friend she was with after realizing she hadn't come home, and they were informed that she had left hours earlier. Her folks were expecting the worst. Laura never lived on the streets for very long. After searching the region in vain, they decided to report their daughter missing to the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office. Officers at the time did not consider the young girl's disappearance to be worrisome, since they believed that teenagers who do not arrive home on time are usually playing with their friends and have become disoriented. When it came to missing teenagers back then, the police usually didn't take them seriously until they had been gone for a longer amount of time. Although Laura was never the subject of a thorough search, authorities posted a bolo sheet. Soon after, a St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office deputy named James Howard Harrison came forward to report that he had spotted the young girl strolling close to a gas station. It seemed that James Howard Harrison was out on patrol the day Laura vanished. He gave the time he'd roughly seen her and then said he'd continued his patrol. Our Laura Ann was short for her age, but she was a strong, independent woman. Her relatives said she was very aware of her surroundings and would never have entered a vehicle with an unknown person. On November 9, 1983, 3 days after Laura Ann disappeared, 2 men found her dead in a drainage ditch not far from the petrol station where she was last seen. Asphyxiation was found to be the cause of her death, and her body was immediately submitted for an autopsy. She had been sexually assaulted and then fatally strangled. The police launched a murder inquiry, but they were unable to gather any concrete evidence from the location of the killing. In order to remove any tangible evidence, the murderer moved Laura Ann's body from the scene of the crime and placed it in a drainage ditch. Based on his actions, it appeared that the murderer had handled evidence and committed crimes before. The authorities found evidence of male DNA on Laura's body. The DNA was stored in a sexual assault kit because, at the time, no one could match it with. DNA testing and the criminal database weren't advanced enough in those days to provide the authorities with any leads regarding the murderer. Eventually, the files from the St. Lucie County Police Department regarding Lorraine's murder investigation went cold. In 2020, the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office established a dedicated cold case squad, and as a result, Laura Ann's case was given another look. Detective Paul Taylor was in charge of the investigation. Numerous flaws in the first study were promptly found. Detective Paul Taylor, who was shocked to be the only officer other than Deputy James Howard Harrison to talk with one of the men who had initially discovered Laura's body, conducted an interview with the man. The discovery had been quite upsetting for him, therefore he had vivid memories of that day and the crime scene. Every time I close my eyes, I picture that young kid lying there. The man continued, telling investigator Paul Taylor all he had witnessed that day. However, the detective was taken aback to discover that his version conflicted with the details in Laura Ann's file. Detective Paul Taylor stated, "I've already gone through the case file and the photos from the crime scene, and what they're telling me doesn't match what I'm seeing." Interviewing the witnesses, he learned that one of their own deputies had pushed them away and then removed Laura's body from the original crime site. The witness stated that Detective James Howard Harrison was the first to arrive at the crime scene when they phoned the police to report finding Laura Ann's death. The individual said Harrison sent them away after getting a few brief statements from them. They never heard from anyone at the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office again about the case after that. Harrison was found to have spent 20 minutes alone himself at the crime site prior to the arrival of other officers. The inquiry was completed quickly. Suspects remained unidentified, and the matter was swiftly shelved for nearly 40 years. Detective Paul Taylor made the decision to investigate Deputy Harrison's past further after hearing this testimony, and what he found was devastating. Detective Paul Taylor named James Howard Harrison, a former deputy sheriff for the Lucie County Sheriff's Office, as the main suspect in the murder of 11-year-old Laura Ann Huizar in February 2022. Harrison has been a pastor and employed by 10 different police enforcement agencies since the 1960s. The last individual to see Laura alive was him. While she was strolling home, he abducted her, molested her, killed her, and disposed of her body in a drainage ditch. 5 months after Laura was killed, Harrison was found to have been let go from the sheriff's office. He was being accused at the time of having raped multiple underage girls in his church. Harrison's fellow deputies had also voiced complaints about him, claiming that over the course of his work as a deputy, he had acted inappropriately near young females. Actually, I'm standing there telling the victim's family that one of our deputies was the one who carried out the crime. Taylor, the stunned detective, replied, "It's rough." Regretfully, Harrison died before the authorities could take him into custody for Laura Ann's rape and murder. 2008 saw his cancerous death. However, in 2020, a warrant was acquired by the detectives to remove his body from the cemetery in order to get a DNA sample. By then, though, Laura's crime scene's DNA had degraded too much to match the sample recovered from Harrison's corpse. But they are positive that James Howard Harrison, the former deputy, killed Laura Ann Huizar. According to the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office, witness testimony, evidence manipulation, and Harrison's history of sexually abusing young girls lead them to believe that Harrison killed Laura Ann. 5 months after Laura Ann Huizar was murdered, investigator Taylor said Harrison was forced to retire from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office and his church due to his inappropriate behavior with young adults. Harrison's DNA was added to both federal and state databases by investigators. His DNA is currently being examined in several Florida cold cases to determine how many additional victims he had. Joe, Laura's elder brother, was utterly shocked that his sister's murderer might at last be identified when the Laura N. Who Is Our Cold case was officially concluded. After all this time, it was only reasonable to feel like a dream of disbelief. "Are you saying that you know who killed our younger sister?" stated Joe. The Huizar family was disappointed with what they believed to be a subpar investigation at the time Laura was killed, but they also expressed gratitude to investigator Paul Taylor for his hard efforts in solving this case. They also stated that they wanted to speak with every investigator involved in the case in 1983. "We believed that things were willfully ignored and not taken care of." The Huizar family claimed that the investigation had enormous holes in it. Guys, what are your thoughts? Did the former deputy abuse children all the time he was a deputy sheriff and a preacher, or did he do it for the entirety of his life? How do we defend our women against these strong males who use the legal system and other institutions to achieve their own nefarious agendas? Kindly provide your thoughts in the space provided for comments below. Moving Moving on to the next case. Mary Catherine Edwards. In 1995, Mary Catherine Edwards, at 31 years old, resided in Beaumont, Texas. She was a well-liked educator with a big social network and a close-knit family. Mary was last seen at her recently purchased townhouse on the evening of Friday, January 13, 1995. When she did not answer her phone the next day, her parents became worried. When they arrived at her house to see how she was doing, they discovered a horrifying scene. It was Mary who had drowned in her own restroom. Her hands were behind her back when she was shackled. She had also been beaten, an autopsy indicated. Her body contained male DNA, which the investigators extracted and preserved for later use. There was no resolution to the lawsuit for over 25 years. Then, in April 2020, detectives started utilizing genetic genealogy to identify potential suspects. They were getting closer to an arrest when they discovered a number of distant cousins. They eventually located Clayton Bernard Foreman thanks to the DNA. Mary and Foreman went to the same high school. In addition, they were casual pals. Mary even attended Foreman and his first wife's wedding as a bridesmaid. Additionally, investigators discovered that the incident against Mary resembled an assault that one of Foreman's high school classmates had experienced in 1981. After entering a guilty plea, Foreman was placed on 3 years of probation. Foreman was accused with killing Mary Catherine Edwards when he was taken into custody in May 2021 in Franklin County, Ohio, where he resided. Foreman was charged on September 22, 2021, a Wednesday. The trial's date has not yet been announced. Moving on to the next case. Rachel Johnson. In 1991, Rachel Johnson, a single mother, resided in Akron, Ohio. She was in a friend's car in March of that year when they experienced a flat tire. They arrived in the convenience store parking lot located at the intersection of Dan Street and Glenwood Avenue. Behind them, a small, worn gray car entered the parking lot. After getting into that car, Rachel left with the man. The man allegedly offered to drive her home, but her body was found on Weller Avenue later that day. She was beaten, stabbed several times, and after being left in the street, even set on fire. DNA evidence was gathered from Rachel's body by investigators. They tried searching databases with it, but they were unsuccessful. A match could only be established in 2019 thanks to an alliance between Advanced DNA and the Akron Police Department. Texas-based Advanced DNA is a genetic testing company that has recently played a major role in the resolution of numerous cold cases. Daniel Lee Reese, 57, was detained in relation to the case in March 2020. His DNA was the same as the suspects discovered back in 1991 at the crime scene. Reese was admitted to the Summit County Jail. He would have been 28 years old at the time of the offense. Rachel's family seems to know him. Though he was never investigated during the first investigation, Reese had been spotted in the same region where she was last seen alive. Additionally, Rachel lived directly across the street from Reese. He would frequently see her daughter, who had moved in with Rachel's mother, after he killed her. The girl had no idea that the man she had known since childhood was also the one who had killed her mother. According to Detective James Pashilik, the DNA will help solve this case. The case was broken by that. In addition, he compared it to attempting to locate a needle in a haystack, and we have in this instance. Moving on to the next case. Krista Bromlett. In 1996, Krista Bromlett, then 23 years old, lived in a mobile home near New Providence, Tennessee. Formerly a sleepy railroad town, New Providence was annexed by the neighboring town of Clarksville. Over the next few years, New Providence saw a surge in drug-related offenses and commercial burglaries, along with growing crime rates overall. Unfortunately, Krista Bromlett became a victim of these issues. Her killer remained at large for 22 years before being apprehended. Krista Bromlett was born in 1973 to Jim Langley and Kim Venable in California. Krista was well known for her intelligence, kindness, and wit. Her relationship with her family was close, but she decided to live alone and become financially independent. Before her mother relocated to Corpus Christi, Texas in 1995 with Krista's 2 small children, the two of them shared a house in Clarksville. Krista desired to remain in Clarksville so she could complete her GED program there. After that, she pursued her high school equivalency despite living alone in a mobile home in order to provide her 2 children a better life. Her neighbor perceived her as cold, despite her family's description of her as kind and loving. Jeff Pennington, Krista Bramlett's landlord, knocked on the door of her trailer in the Sunnydale Mobile Home Park, which is located off of Peachers Mill Road, in the afternoon on October 28, 1996. Krista was contacted by the landlord to talk about a fire that happened a week prior, but she never replied. But later, when Jeff tried to get in touch with Krista, he found out something horrible. He noticed Krista Bramlett's shoeless figure in the living room, lying in the flickering light of a tiny colored television. Then I phoned the police, claimed a scared Jeff Pennington. At the time of Krista's murder, Clarksville, Tennessee police were investigating many house homicides of women. The killings, according to the police, had nothing to do with the particle case. Following Krista's death, the mobile home was examined by the Clarksville Police Department crime scene team, which was searching for any evidence that could lead to Krista's killer. The Montgomery County Medical Examiner conducted Krista's autopsy. The autopsy determined that Krista Bramlett had suffocated to death, and evidence of a rape kit contained evidence of sexual abuse. In an attempt to locate a match, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations lab received the forensics DNA results from the rape kit and put the information into CODIS. In an attempt to find possible witnesses, about 6 police interviewed between 50 and 60 neighbors at the start of the investigation. On October 27, 1996, a neighbor reported seeing Krista sitting on her porch, as was her usual. However, Krista tended to be aloof and people avoided her company. After receiving close to a dozen tips, the police anticipated making an arrest within a week. However, the leads dwindled. There were no possible suspects found. Years went by without anyone being arrested. It wasn't until February 13, 2019, 22 years later, that Clarksville Police Department Detective Michael Uray received the information he so desperately desired. As it turned out, the suspect's DNA from Krista's rape kit eventually matched that of a suspect who lived in Phoenix, Arizona. Cody's DNA matched that of Kenneth Hudspeth, a 48-year-old man. Hudspeth had not yet been mentioned in the investigation, according to Detective Michael Uray, and no one had taken notice of him. Detective Uray discovered that Hudspeth had actually resided in Clarksville at the time of Krista's murder, and had left the city in December 1997 when he met with the suspect in April. Hudspeth did not dispute every detail that was given to him. He identified himself as Krista's friend and said he was the last person to see her alive. The DNA evidence from this interview led to the arrest of Hudspeth and charges of homicide. He was spared extradition and moved to Tennessee pending trial. Hudspeth's arrest records revealed to investigators that he had been arrested several times for charges including felony assault and domestic abuse. He has spent time behind bars in Arizona and Texas. His DNA ought to have been in Cody's years ago, but investigators believe that swabs may have been lost or damaged in the chain of custody. Hudspeth claimed that while living in the Sunnydale Mobile Home Park in Clarksville, he had previously engaged in drug use with Krista Bramlett. The toxicology result by Krista Bramlett, which showed a low blood alcohol concentration, disproved these claims. He first denied having sex with her when asked, but he acknowledged that he had been so intoxicated that he couldn't remember if he had sex with her after viewing the autopsy results and the DNA discovered within Bramlett and on her bra. I was high on drugs. She is someone I know. Have I slept with her? Speaking in court, Hudspeth remarked, I don't remember that. I just can't image me killing this woman and raping her. He stated it again. I hope I didn't. Upon learning of a development in the case, Krista Bramlett's relatives were notified. It was only a question of time, as I always understood. We were always confident that they would identify the perpetrator. According to Krista's grandmother, 52-year-old Kenneth Hudspeth was found guilty by the judge and given a life sentence for the murder of Krista Bramlett in January 2022, capping a grueling 22-year ordeal. Moving on to the next case. Mary Mathis Davis. On May 30th, 1987, Mary Mathis Davis, a 29-year-old mother of two, disappeared from Lexington. Her family and friends were shocked to learn of her abduction. The community was stunned to find her body the next day, hidden behind a nearby supermarket. Before a breakthrough in 2023, the case remained unsolved for over 30 years, despite the police department's best efforts. In this scenario, we are in the North Carolina city of Lexington. Lexington is renowned as the barbecue capital of the world due to its well-known barbecue and rich and varied cultural history. Beyond its delicious food, Lexington boasts a quaint downtown filled with unique shops and restaurants that capture the spirit of the friendly city. The city's historic uptown Lexington district is well liked by tourists and features exquisitely restored early 19th century architecture. Mary Mathis Davis was born in Lexington on February 12, 1958. Even so, hardly much is known about her formative years. Lisa Hinkle was her sister, and she grew up with her. Nothing could ever separate Mary and Lisa since they were so closely bonded. Lisa characterized her sister as a kind, understanding individual who could always make a space seem more cheerful with her infectious smile. It was also reported that Mary had a gift for making others feel comfortable. Mary had the opportunity to meet Richard Davis when the two reached adulthood. As they got to know one another, a spark started to grow between them. And before they knew it, a passionate relationship had overtaken them. Richard Davis knew he wanted to live out the rest of his life with Mary as their love developed. One day, out of the blue, he asked Mary to marry him, and Mary was thrilled. He proposed to her, and she accepted without hesitation. After Richard proposed to Mary, they immediately began to look forward to starting a family together. They shared their dreams and hopes for the new life they were about to start, talking for hours on end about what was ahead of them. The pair exchanged vows in a lovely and intimate ceremony as the big day drew near. Mary and Richard started a new chapter in their lives after the wedding and looked forward to the voyage that lay ahead. The years went so swiftly, and Mary and Richard soon had two beautiful kids. Tracy was the second child, and the first was a female. Mary loved her children dearly and relished every moment spent with them. Her heart was full of love. Later, in order to provide for her growing family, she took a job at Lanier's Ace Hardware in Lexington. It wasn't the most glamorous work, but Mary didn't mind. She was grateful for the opportunity to earn a steady income. Mary didn't make much money, but even so, it was plenty to cover her expenses and put food on the table. Despite the challenges of juggling the responsibilities of motherhood and a job, Mary was committed to providing the best life she could for her family. Things moved along at a steady rate as the days became weeks, and then those weeks became months. Although Mary was content on the inside and her family was doing well, disaster was always present and could strike at any time. Thanks for watching her house as usual on May 30th, 1987 to go to work. She had no idea that Saturday would be her last day on Earth, even though it seemed like any other Saturday. Mary greeted her co-workers and smiled when she arrived at work before beginning her shift. She began her assignment with much enthusiasm. But as the hours went by, she became more and more restless and hungry. Her stomach was complaining by midday, so she patiently awaited meals. She was relieved to be able to leave the four walls of her employment when the moment finally arrived. She planned to treat herself to a lovely dinner. To determine if she had enough money for lunch, she opened her purse, and she left her store and headed to a nearby restaurant once she was positive she did. After this, no one would ever see Mary alive again. She never returned to her job. With every second that passed after her lunch break, her absence became increasingly apparent. Her cow laborers were curious as to why it was taking her so long. The minutes felt like hours, and their perplexity turned to worry. There were no signs of her return, so they realized they had to find her fast. Without hesitation, one of them offered to go look for her in the restaurant where she had lunch. Heart thumping, the coworker ran to the restaurant, but Mary wasn't there. The problem was becoming worse, and neither the restaurant personnel nor the management could help. The employee said that she had not seen Mary at the restaurant when she returned to the hardware store. The staff of the hardware store became terrified as soon as they heard this and realized they had to take this more seriously. Without waiting any longer, they grabbed up the phone and phoned the emergency number. The cops showed there relatively immediately after being briefed on the incident. In order to let Mary's parents and spouse know what was going on, the co-workers also called them. That day, the police immediately began searching for Mary, but initially they turned up nothing. Word of her disappearance spread, leaving the neighborhood in a state of anxiety and confusion. She was entirely out of sight. Mary's family, on the other hand, was left to bear the suffering of not knowing where she was or what had happened to her. However, they prayed and hoped that their beloved Mary would be discovered to be okay. Richard struggled to fall asleep that night. He was awake at night thinking. He sensed that his family was going to have a major issue. It did not make sense to him. And that's when he understood Mary's disappearance was not a simple case of getting lost in the city. His thoughts strayed to their children and how he would greet them the next day. The naive children had been asking Richard about their mother, not realizing that she might be in danger. Richard could not handle the thought of having to inform them that she might not come back, but he knew he had to be there for his children no matter what. When the sun came up the following morning, the search continued for Mary. However, it appeared as though all the work was in vain. The authorities and Mary's family were frantically looking for any information on her unexpected disappearance. As the day went on, the police unexpectedly received a call informing them that a dead corpse had been found behind the Winn-Dixie store. A few police officers raced to the area as soon as they received the call. Upon witnessing a small gathering surrounding the body's discovery, the police swiftly intervened to ensure the area was secured. They could see that the body had been there for a while. A faint smell of decay was already beginning to emanate from it. Upon closer inspection, they were able to identify the body as that of Mary Mathis Davis. The cops' expressions conveyed shock and amazement, but they also realized that they had to investigate further. The reason of death was not immediately apparent. Thus, the police immediately began searching the area for any potential clues. They also asked the supermarket employees about the victim's fate, but none of them seemed to know much about it. After that, the body was taken away for an autopsy. On the day Mary's death was found, one of the police officers arrived at her family's residence. The officer informed her family of the devastating news while the mood was heated. He conveyed his sympathies and the limited details they have on Mary's encounter. The news was devastating, to be sure, since Mary's family was devastated and distraught. When Mary's autopsy results were released a few days later, it was found that she had been strangled to death. It was also discovered that she had been the victim of sexual assault. This led to the classification of Mary's death as a homicide. While Mary's family continued to grieve and to remain strong, the authorities began to investigate her death. The detectives had a lot of unanswered questions, and they were determined to uncover the answers. As pieces of evidence, investigators had DNA samples taken from the crime scene. However, at the time, there wasn't much that could be done with this because of the lack of sophisticated DNA technology. Despite this drawback, investigators worked day and night, assiduously following up on every lead and tip that came their way. They eventually made an appeal to the public for help in the hopes that someone would come forward with information that would help unravel the mystery surrounding the case. But all of their attempts were in vain. It seemed as though the murderer had disappeared off the face of the planet, leaving the detectives feeling helpless. The killer appeared to have escaped as the days stretched into weeks and ultimately months. But Mary's family never gave up and never doubted that in the end, justice would be done, no matter how long it took. Though they tried their best to move on, the wounds from their loss never fully healed. Lisa, Mary's sister, came forward and talked to the public almost 25 years after Mary was killed, detailing the sadness and suffering her family endured when Mary was taken from them. She opened up to the media about their suffering and how hard life had been without her beloved sister at her side. Lisa thought back to their pleasant times together with Mary and realized that the family had never given up faith that they would one day achieve the closure they so dearly needed. She disclosed that the family was willing to forgive Mary's killer and that they had no desire for retaliation, despite the suffering and loss. In 2022, a fresh team of investigators assigned to Mary's murder case decided to look over the available data. They were aware of the advancements in DNA technology and felt that in contrast to 1987, they had a greater chance of solving the case. The detectives then gave the North Carolina State Crime Lab some concrete evidence. The positive findings of the evidence analysis prompted a call to the North Carolina Bureau of Investigation to investigate the matter. Everything moved more quickly after that. The State Bureau of Investigation contacted Othram, a private forensic genealogy laboratory located in Texas. A DNA fragment of the evidence was then transmitted to Othram, where researchers used it to build a family tree of possible suspects. After months of careful work, the man suspect who was initially unidentified was ultimately recognized. Mary Mathis Davis was murdered, and her killer was identified as Russell Grant Woods. After making the discovery, the investigators were relieved since they knew the case was solved. But there was an issue. A background check revealed that the murderer had died in 2013 at the age of 58, so there was no way to bring him to justice. Although Russell Grant Wood had been identified as a suspect in the case earlier, insufficient evidence at the time compelled detectives to divert their attention. In addition, it was discovered that Mary and Russell Grant Wood were acquainted before to her passing. However, the nature of their relationship remains uncertain. The state would have proceeded with indictments and charged Russell Grant Wood with first-degree rape, kidnapping, and murder if he had been living. On February 3, 2023, Mary's surviving family was informed of the case's breakthrough. They expressed gratitude to the investigators for their dedication to the probe. We prayed that we would one day track down the individual who brutally killed our dear Mary. Now that we know some answers, while it won't make Mary return, that does provide us with a feeling of resolution. Mary's niece, Lori Martin, informed the media that her family celebrated Mary's memory with a memorial celebration at Forest Hill Memorial Park on February 12, 2023. It would have been her 65th birthday if she had survived. We were fortunate to have Mary for the length of time we did since she was a light in this world. She was a devoted wife, sister, friend, and mother. According to Lori Martin, we know she is resting easily in the arms of our Lord and Savior. Even though the murderer has been apprehended and the mystery behind Mary's death has been unraveled, there are still a lot of unanswered questions. In what way do you believe Mary and Russell were connected? Share your thoughts with us by posting them in the comments box. Moving on to the next case. Robert Ford. In August of 2018, a calm evening in Conway, South Carolina was rocked by the brutal murders of Robert Ford and his son, Robbie Ford. The horrific act sent shockwaves through the little hamlet when their body was discovered dead outside their house on Highway 19. As detectives dug deeper into the case, a dark conspiracy involving betrayal, greed, and a terrifying scheme masterminded by a close relative emerged. Many were left wondering what could possibly motivate a family member to commit such an unimaginable atrocity. Robert Ford, who was 59 years old, was a well-liked person in the Conway neighborhood. He was raised nearby and devoted a large portion of his life to serving at Good Hope Baptist Church, where he held the positions of choir director and legacy member for many years. Robert's extensive musical repertoire, which included both modern Christian tunes and classic gospel hymns, was a big part of who he was. Robert's daily actions demonstrated his dedication to his community. He constantly greeted guests with a smile and shared fruit from his garden. It was not the only catastrophe Robert would face that would ultimately bring the Ford family to pieces. Melda Ford, his adored wife, would die in 2016. He was severely impacted by the loss. Robert, however, continued to be a source of strength for his family and society, in spite of this personal tragedy. Robert Ford's son, Robbie Ford, was a young man of 25 years old with a bright future ahead of him. He studied at Clemson University with the same commitment to learning that his father had shown him all of his life. Robert provided Robbie with financial support during his schooling and personal struggles, demonstrating the deep link between father and son. Samantha Rabin was Robert's daughter from a prior relationship. Even though Samantha and Robbie are half-siblings, their upbringings were very different. Samantha maintained her independence from her father's household, living in a separate domicile, while Robert and Robbie shared a home on Highway 19 in Conway. She was still a member of the family, but she did not spend as much time with them or have as strong of a tie. The Ford family appeared to be ordinary on the outside, but there were sinister forces at work that would soon result in the deaths of the father and son. Neighbors of the Ford family house on August 17, 2018, the fatal day, reported hearing gunshots in the afternoon. Authorities were notified by concerned citizens, and they arrived to the site quickly. When the police arrived, they found Robert and Robbie Ford outside their house, shot to death. The scene of the incident revealed a bleak image of premeditated violence. Investigators discovered evidence pointing to a purposeful effort to remove any traces of the offender's identity. A Ford-related car was found nearby, apparently burned in an attempt to erase important evidence. Investigators were committed to piecing together the events of that fatal day, despite the perpetrator's attempts to destroy evidence. Authorities examined possible witnesses and swiftly went over both digital and tangible material. Based on witness testimony and circumstantial evidence, these efforts resulted in the identification of numerous people of interest. Nonetheless, it would take detectives 2 years to construct a case, establish timeframes, and determine plausible motives for the crime. As convincing leads emerged from the forensic study of digital traces and physical evidence, the inquiry saw major advancements. Randy Granger, 53, was recognized by authorities as the shooter who carried out the killings based on the evidence that had accumulated and the statements of the witnesses. Granger's life was dotted with legal run-ins and a turbulent history. Furthermore, he had a criminal history that includes convictions for violent crimes previous to his involvement in the Ford killings. His criminal past gave the impression that he was someone who was acquainted with the less moral aspects of society. In 2020, Granger was taken into custody in relation to the Ford killings, and his subsequent testimony was crucial in revealing the complex sequence of events that led up to the murder. Granger's DNA profile was determined to match evidence collected in cigarette butts and a partially burned skull cap. Samantha Rabin, Robbie's half-sister and Robert Ford's daughter, was quickly charged with being the mastermind behind the brutal crime following Randy Granger's arrest. The goal seems to be to inherit a sizable sum of money, including insurance money. Granger had been given $20,000 by Samantha to carry out the killings. Granger's girlfriend, Teresa Martin, was also accused of being an accessory after the fact. Martin was accused of driving Samantha to and from the crime scene and of helping to arrange the link between Samantha and Granger. Numerous testimony, forensic evidence, and legal arguments were all part of the intricate, multi-year judicial process. In April 2023, Granger's trial came to an end. He was accused of committing a deadly crime, arson, and criminal conspiracy. DNA evidence and Martin's testimony supported his testimony regarding his involvement. Randy Granger was found guilty on all counts and given 2 consecutive life sentences without the chance of release, in addition to an extra 20 years for criminal conspiracy and arson. In February 2024, Samantha Rabin's trial came to an end. She was accused of soliciting the murder, conspiring to carry out the killing, and using deadly violence. Granger, Martin, and other forensic specialists testified at Samantha's trial. And there was also evidence in the form of phone records and text messages that demonstrated Samantha's coordination with Granger and Martin. The prosecution highlighted Samantha's financial motivation by highlighting the sizable fortune she was expected to receive following the deaths of her father and half-brother. Samantha had a million reasons, according to Lee Andrew Waller, Senior Assistant Counsel for the 15th Judicial Circuit. She listed the elder Ford's possessions, which included a residence, life insurance, a 401k investment account with Edward Jones, and $100,000 in a bank account. Robbie Ford would have been the principal beneficiary following Robert's death. She added that at the time of the killings, Samantha was living in a single-wide trailer with her husband and 3 kids and making $30,000 a year. Later, she moved into the house of her late father. Samantha Rabin ultimately received a sentence of 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole along with additional consecutive sentences of 30 years on the charges of solicitation and conspiracy. She was found guilty on all counts. Teresa Martin entered into a plea agreement in which she admitted guilt to the charge of accessory after the fact. Her testimony, which described her involvement and that of the other two culprits, was vital to the outcomes of Granger's and Samantha's trials. Martin is awaiting sentencing, although because of her cooperation with the prosecution, a lesser sentence is anticipated. The terrible case of Robert and Robbie Ford has had a long-lasting effect on their town, despite the Ford family appearing to have a good number of secrets. Everyone who knew them was startled and grieved by their sudden death. The community also takes some comfort in the fact that justice was done, despite the betrayal surrounding the murder. Firuza Daganpour. In 1983, Firuza Daganpour, then 24 years old, was a student at the University of Nebraska in Omaha. After attending her evening classes on August 13, 1983, she vanished from the college grounds. Then, on August 14th, a day later, fishermen in the nearby Iowan town of Council Bluffs found her body beneath a bridge in Pigeon Creek. Fauci had been battered, stabbed in the abdomen, and cut in the throat, according to an autopsy. Several agencies collaborated to try and identify the offender throughout the course of the following few months. Sadly, they were unable to, and the investigation was abandoned. Afterwards, in 2020, a friend of Fauci's contacted detectives with the name of a potential suspect in the case. With a strong alibi, investigators were able to rule that person out right away. However, while re-examining the case, they discovered that the detectives who worked on the original investigation had gathered a number of pieces of evidence from the crime scene that, given the advancements in DNA technology, might still be relevant today. A bra, underwear, shirt, notebooks, computer printouts, work gloves, prescription glasses, a beer can, 2 pencils, and work gloves were among the evidence. These things had all been kept in storage at the sheriff's office for almost 40 years. After sending the objects to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation Laboratory for DNA analysis, the investigators discovered in March 2021 that the DNA of a male and Firuza was present in a blood-stained glove that was discovered at the site. The National Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS database, allowed them to connect the unidentified DNA to Bud Leroy Christensen. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Christensen's fingerprints were also discovered by investigators on documents discovered next to the deceased. Christensen has a lengthy criminal past and has done numerous similar offenses throughout the years. Authorities declared on April 30th, 2021, that Christensen had been taken into custody and accused with killing Virus. During the press briefing, crime scene technician Hadley Mikovich stated that the arrest in this case was made possible by the significant scientific advancements in DNA analysis over the past few decades. I want to urge victims' relatives and friends to never give up and to keep up their hard work assisting law police with their investigations. She remarked that Firuza's situation should serve as a reminder that it is never too late to look for solutions. Firuza's father and brother, who reside in Iran and London, respectively, were informed of the arrest. Moving on to the next case. Geelong Bardo Family 4. Children's mutilated bodies, Tan Kook Peng, Tan Kook Hien, Tan Kook Soon, and their sister Tan Chin Ni, were discovered in their Housing and Development Board flat early on January 6, 1979. That morning, at around 6:35 a.m., their parents, who shared a minibus, left the house to drive pupils to school, leaving their sleeping children behind. As was their normal habit, the mother called home at 7:10 a.m. to wake the kids, but after 3 calls, she got no answer. After that, she asked a neighbor to assist her in waking them up. The neighbor also knocked on their flat door and got no answer. When the Tans got home after 10 in the morning, Miss Tan discovered her children's cut bodies piled on top of one another in the toilet. The poor kids had slashed wounds on their skulls when they were discovered, dressed just in t-shirts and jeans. Cook Penn's right arm was nearly severed, and Chimney's face also had slash wounds. Every child's body was nearly entirely covered in slashes. Neither an indication of forced entry nor anything missing from the flat were present. After conducting an investigation into the murders, the CID Special Investigations Department came to the conclusion that the murders were premeditated and that the perpetrators took care to leave no trace of their crimes. Nonetheless, bloodstains were found in the kitchen sink, and it was assumed that the murderer or murderers had cleaned up before fleeing the apartment. There was no sign of the murder weaponry, which was thought to be a kitchen chopper and a knife. The police admitted that the crime may have been motivated by retaliation, but every lead they pursued ended up being false or a dead end. The deaths may have been connected to an illicit Thontine enterprise, according to Mrs. Stan's brother, but the Tans informed the police they had not made any enemies and the trail did not lead to the murderer. The family appeared to be well known to the murderers, and the nightmare did not end there. It appeared to them that the mother had had her youngest child sterilized at some point after. 2 weeks after Chinese New Year, they supposedly received a card with a picture of happy children playing and the chilling message, "Now you can have no more offspring," signed by the murderer in Mandarin. The sender of the car also addresses the Tans by their nicknames, suggesting that they are well acquainted with the family. The police interviewed more than 100 neighbors of the Tan family and made public requests for witnesses, but they were unable to gather any meaningful information. Locals stated that a witness who was unable to be found had seen Chin Ni fighting with a man from his flat in a different block. The cops also questioned the parents of the children. A police inquiry eventually found that the witness's account of seeing a couple, one of them bloodstained, leaving the murder site, was a fabrication. The witness spoke to a Chinese newsweeper thereafter. Yam Yin Thin, a 68-year-old neighbor of the town, claimed that she would have witnessed anyone entering or leaving the Tan family's flat since she frequently sat along the shared corridor to watch kids play. She was washing her hair the morning of the murders, though, and she did not witness anyone going into or out of the town flat. Subsequently, a taxi driver came forward to identify a man in his 20s who, at approximately 8 in the morning, boarded a taxi near the scene of the murder with a lurch. The man held a knife that banged against the vehicle door, according to the taxi driver, and had bloodstains on the left side of his torso. The man was recognized by the driver in a police lineup, and it was discovered that he was the Tan family's neighbor who regularly dropped by to use the phone. The children called him Uncle, but after 2 weeks he was freed because there wasn't enough proof. Afterwards, the Malaysian man and his sister moved out. On January 7, 1979, the kids were laid to rest in Cho Chu Kang Cemetery beside their school supplies, literature, and playthings. When the mother's sterilization was reversed in 1983, she gave birth to a boy at the age of 35. The murderer has never been apprehended, and the case is still open to interpretation. Moving on to the next case. James Batterson. James Batterson, 54, was a resident of Macarafelt, Northern Ireland. James spent Sunday night, October 6, 1991, at a Mid-Ulster hospital visiting a buddy. He wasn't seen again after that. He vanished, along with his blue-green Ford Ariane. His whereabouts remained a mystery despite extensive searches. His loved one's fate remained a mystery to his family. 1. It was one of the longest-running missing persons cases in Northern Ireland. Then, on July 18, 2020, a local search and rescue crew noticed an automobile in the river bog. It's a well-liked destination for tourists and anglers on New Ferry Road. James Bellerson was last seen driving a blue-green Ford Ariane, which is the same model of automobile that was recovered from the water. After human remains were discovered inside the vehicle, they were recognized as Mr. Patterson's. The family was given access to the remains again. At last, a funeral at Macarafelt took place. The family would not have expected this result, but at least they now know. His death and its circumstances are not being investigated. It appears to have been a fatal accident. Moving on to the next case. James Essel. James Essel was a devoted husband and father who resided in Virginia Beach's Montgomery County. The convenience store in Sugarloaf Mountain Market belonged to him. James's body was discovered laying behind the counter in March 1992. He suffered 29 stab wounds. Given that the suspect's blood was also discovered at a crime scene, it was evident that he had battled valiantly for his life. The only lead the police had was this one, but they weren't able to do much with it because DNA technology wasn't as developed as it is now. The DNA samples the police had gathered were delivered to Parabon Nanolabs in 2017. Parabon Nanolabs produced 2 photos, one depicting the suspect's possible 1992 and 2017 looks. Unfortunately, this did not help, and in order to solve this case, the police chose to concentrate on genetic genealogy. They limited the search by using databases to locate the suspect's relatives. They whittled it down to Hans Whitz in January 2020. Police took a sample of Whitz's DNA on February 10th, and it matched the blood they discovered exactly. They went to his house to arrest him 2 days later. In his car, they discovered him. He waved at the cops while brandishing a rifle. He was shot dead when he disobeyed orders to drop it. His neighbor recorded it all on camera. Hans's wife is currently trying to clear the name of her late husband since she thinks he is innocent. Moving on to the next case. James Zamora. In Greeley, Colorado, on September 18, 2001, a 7-year-old girl and her 8-year-old brother were walking to school. Standing outside an alley, a man jumped out and pushed a small girl into his car. After that, he took a car to a remote location close to the Greeley airport, where he attacked her. After escaping, she walked to the Air National Guard close to the airport, where police were contacted. The man had light skin, according to the victim. She thought he might have been in his late 20s. He may have had a snake tattoo on one arm, and his complexion was uneven. He knew a little Spanish as well. The man's identity remained a mystery for many years, despite investigators' best efforts to identify him. Investigators contacted Virginia-based Parabon Nanolabs in August 2019 to obtain the Snapshot DNA phenotyping service. The snapshot generated a picture that suggested a subject's possible appearance. They are able to forecast his skin tone, eye color, hair color, facial shape, and lineage. This is what they devised. In order to help identify the man, Parabon Nanolabs also used genetic genealogy. They finally recognized a man as James Zamora in 2021. He was 26 years old. This is an image of him from the year 2001. Regretfully, the little girl will not receive justice because he passed away in 2012. James may have further involvement in unsolved cases, according to investigators. Moving on to the next case. Kenya McClintock and Kevin Drinks. 1978 saw the meeting of 16-year-old Kevin Drinks and 15-year-old Kenya McClintock in Philadelphia. They were best friends in high school. Germantown High's senior prom was attended by him, but they split up soon after graduation. Kevin and Kenya reconnected in 2000, 2 decades later. Kevin paid his respects to the home of Kenya after her mother passed away. In front of over 100 guests, they were married in 2001 at the Unitarian Society of Germantown Church. Kenya was serenaded by Kevin as she made her way down the aisle. He came from a long family of singers and was a gifted vocalist. They purchased their ideal house in Ronhurst, Pennsylvania in 2011. Kevin got a job as a delivery driver for a furniture company in North Philadelphia. Kevin's younger brother called Kenya a few months after they had purchased the home. He was yelling hysterically and directing Kenya to head to the hospital. Kenya hurried to Hahnemann Hospital, believing Kevin might have been involved in an automobile accident. It was there that she discovered Kevin had been shot and killed in front of the furniture store where he had recently begun working. Kenya couldn't make sense of it. Kevin was a devoted granddad who enjoyed spending time with his family and singing gospel music. Why and by whom would someone seek to kill him? Even with the greatest of intentions, the investigators were unable to respond to any of Kenya's inquiries. In the vicinity of the shooting, she distributed flyers, buttons, and t-shirts advocating for justice for Kevin Drinks. She begged for assistance from her elected representatives over the phone. Kenya also had to cope with whispers suggesting Kevin had ties to the underworld. She also became irritated as she saw Kevin's case close, but Kevin's remained unsolved. Their ideal house became a place filled with frightening memories. She questioned whether she was secure because she had no idea who had targeted her husband. Kenya then made a change. She prayed, demanded answers from the authorities, and then prayed some more. She eventually received the news she had been seeking for so long in 2018. Detective John Verrocchio of the Philadelphia Police called her. He had heard something pertinent to Kevin's case while listening to tapes of phone calls made from the jailhouse. A 22-year-old guy was charged with Chad Runnels' murder 2 months prior to Kevin's shooting death. Chad was concerned that he would be testified against by a crucial witness. Then he conspired with 3 other men, Michael Rishon Combs and Simaja Armstead. Their goal was to quiet the witness. Rather, they unintentionally shot the incorrect man, Kevin Dreams. Kenya had been waiting a long time for answers, and when they did arrive, they were devastating. Runnels, Blackston, and Armstead were found guilty in March 2022 and given life sentences. June 2022 is when Combs is expected to be sentenced. District Attorney Larry Krasner expressed his hope that this case will demonstrate to Philadelphia that thanks for watching. Officers never give up on a case and are constantly trying. Kenya lauded her dream team while simultaneously expressing her unhappiness about the case's protracted unsolved status. Kathy Lees, the witness victim coordinator, and associate district attorneys Ashley Toksolowski and Christian Wynn make up this group. People may argue, oh, that's not really justice because he's not here, according to a remark from Kenya. He's still not back. However, my hubby is free to rest. That's my perspective on it. Moving on to the next case. Jody Loomis. On August 23, 1972, at approximately 5:30 p.m., a couple traveling up a dark dirt lane off Penny Creek Road in Snohomish County, Washington, discovered 20-year-old Jody Loomis. A fallen tree obstructed the couple's way as they drove up the dirt road, impeding their plans to go target shooting. When they emerged to pull the tree aside, they were horrified to see a woman who had been shot in the head laying there, conscious but dying. In her pants, high socks, and dark waffle stomper-style boots, which a source claims she acquired from her 12-year-old sister, Jody Loomis lay half-naked in the woods. Jody's right ear was shot above. She could not communicate with the couple that hurried her to Stevens Hospital, even though she was still alive. Sadly, she was declared dead when they arrived, and it was too late to save her. It looked to be a warm Wednesday afternoon on April 23, 1972, when Jody Loomis made the decision to ride her 10-speed bicycle to visit her horse at a barn 6 miles away. Jody left without her parents, wearing jeans, a crop top, and waffle stomper boots. The day she was raped and killed was the first time she had visited the horse stable by herself. Normally, her parents would drop her there. Years passed with no conclusion to her death, leaving her family and detectives haunted. Neither side ever gave up. The police investigated the case with diligence. In the hopes that someone would come forward with information, they once distributed out playing cards in jails, but nothing was discovered. Although the case swiftly became unresponsive, there was still some optimism for the investigators and Jody's family. After the evidence from the crime site was transported to a crime lab, the case was later reopened in 2008. The tiny semen stain on Jody Loomis's boots provided a DNA sample, but it did not match any of the male suspects the detectives had listed. For 10 more years, the case remained unsolved until 2018, when investigators made significant progress. The forensics team used genetic genealogy to try to identify potential suspects by uploading the DNA profile to open-access ancestry websites. Terrence Miller was identified by Washington state investigators as a potential suspect thanks to the use of DNA testing. Miller, a retired heavy equipment operator, and his spouse owned and operated a pottery company in Edmonds, Washington, approximately 17 miles away from the scene of Jody's murder. Miller was subsequently placed under surveillance by the police, and they eventually collected his DNA from a coffee cup that he had thrown away at a casino. Investigators discovered that the DNA sample from the coffee cup and the DNA sample from Jody Loomis's boot matched exactly. Reports state that during the 1960s, Terrence Miller was at least 5 times charged with sexual offenses. The Snohomish County Sheriff's Department detained him and filed a first-degree murder complaint against him in 2019. But Miller killed himself a few hours before a jury would find him guilty. Nevertheless, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder 3 hours after sheriff's deputies discovered him dead in his home. Moving on to the next case. Mr. Williams. An important breakthrough in a nearly 5-decade cold case involving 3 hitchhiking girls and a guy who was initially labeled by detectives as a predator was made public by Indianapolis Metropolitan Police. At a news conference, the enigmatic assailant accountable for the vicious attacks on the young girls in a field was revealed, bringing a definitive end to the long-running investigation that had plagued the community for years. While confined in Galveston, Texas, Thomas Edward Williams, known as the Slasher by both law enforcement and the victims, passed away in November 1983 at the age of 49. Williams lived close to the scene of the kidnapping at the time of the incident. 3 girls attempted to get to an amusement facility by hitchhiking near the 800 block of East Washington Street in 1975. They soon discovered they were in serious danger when they noticed the man who had picked them up had taken off the inside door handle of the front passenger door. The girls were driven by a man who appeared to be in his 40s, past the place they were supposed to go and into Hancock County. Eventually, the driver turned onto a county road and into a cornfield. He raped the youngest daughter, who was only 11 years old at the time, thereby stabbing her 15 times in the chest and 3 times in the throat. The 13 and 14-year-olds were then slain by him, and he left them all for dead. In February 2018, the eldest victim said, "I heard him moving around, and then the car door closed and the engine started. I wanted to get away, so I was trying to figure out which way he was going when the 13-year-old grabbed my leg and sent me falling. I had no idea which way he was going." The youngest victim was the eldest victim's sister, but the 2 older victims were unable to find her. She had been pulled deeper into the field by the man. The youngest victim said, "He picked me up and threw me into the cornfield." The 2 elderly victims succeeded in crawling onto US 40 from the field, perhaps in an attempt to signal for assistance. 3 men came to their aid, escorting them to a motel and phoning the police. The first police on the scene at the motel likened the girls' neck slashes to the appearance of an accordion. Then the police went back out to the scene to look for the youngest victim. Newspaper articles shared leads and produced suspect sketches based on the girls' descriptions, sparking a multi-year quest for the attacker. A police detective said in a news article that the sketch fit the description of a guy who has been accused of kidnapping and sexually abusing girls from East Side schools. 12 investigators were assigned to the case at that time by the Marion County Sheriff. 4 months after the attacks in December 1975, Marion County prosecutors named a Homer man as a suspect, but no charges were brought. Though the hunt went on, the case eventually came to nothing. When Steve Gibbs, a detective sergeant with the Marion County Sheriff's Office, took on the cold case in 2018, he compared the attacker to a victim hunter, saying that being in his automobile was like being ensnared in a web of spiders. There is no way out. The women had their DNA sampled on January 9, 2019, and Sergeant David Ellison, who had taken over the investigation, was in charge of the procedure. They went to the city-county building to give samples of their DNA to be compared with the available records. Indianapolis police stated in a press release that they were able to locate the culprit using DNA analysis, but they did not provide any further information. Deputy Chief Kendall Adams of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department addressed the 3 women after a partnership between Audio Chuck, DNA Labs International, and Indianapolis Police. He expressed his hope that this would be the first step in bringing closure through the criminal justice system. Mrs. Rottler-Trick acknowledged that not everyone would agree with her decision to forgive Mr. Williams for the attack when she made the announcement during the news conference. The last woman to speak to the crowd was Mrs. Smith. She said that having Mr. Williams's name confirmed gave her a feeling of closure and that her family had received justice. She said, "It has brought peace to my heart." Moving on to the next case. Tina Fills. In 1984, Tina Fills, then 14 years old, resided in Pleasanton, California. She was a Foothill High School student. Tina was strolling from school on April 5th. She usually rode the bus home, but she chose to walk home because some of the other students had been making fun of her. Tina walked along a road that led from Astor Court to Lemonwood Way, taking a shortcut. After that, she went to her Valley Trails house using her pass and the I-680. Tina, though, would never get there. Concerned, her relatives dialed 911 to report Tina missing to the authorities. It didn't take long to locate her body near the underpass. Tina had suffered 44 stab wounds. At a crime scene, investigators discovered the attacker's DNA, but the search for a credible suspect proved fruitless, and the matter was abandoned for a while. Investigators uploaded DNA discovered at a crime scene to the CODIS database in 2011. It directed detectives to Stephen Carlson, a man who was incarcerated already. Carlson. At the time of the crime, Stephen was 16 years old. He and Tina both went to the same school. Stephen said at a party in 1986 that he killed Tina, although he later clarified that he was joking. Stephen also lived close to the crime scene. Although Stevens maintained his innocence, he was found guilty in 2014 of killing Tina. He received a 26-year prison term. He didn't admit to what he had done until October 2020. Completed. He wrote Tina's family letters of confession. These are a few of the things he mentioned in her letters. I apologize greatly for the delay in sending this letter. For many years, I lived in the Nile, unable to accept responsibility for your death on April 5th, 1984. Unable to believe that I had killed you. It's important for you and your family to know that you did nothing at all to earn my treatment of you. That's why what I did was so heinous and cruel. He was also teased at school on the day he killed her. After a fight with the school football team, he found himself in a dumpster. I recall being furious because everyone in my class was making fun of me. Everything happened pretty quickly. I recall getting a butcher knife from the kitchen. Tina Fales was standing in the field when I crossed the street. A 14-year-old girl could have found it terrifying to have to walk through that scary drainage tunnel while you were just going about your business. Imagine her horror when I attacked her. Drew Fales, Tina's brother, who lost his sister when he was just 8 years old, expressed his gratitude for Stephen's confession, saying it's good to know he's owning up to his mistakes. Although receiving confirmation from that section helps me feel better, it doesn't fix the problem. Tina and Stephen's classmates were not shocked because they knew Stephen was guilty. In school, he went by the moniker Creepy Carlson, according to them. Moving on to the next case. Tara Calico. Tara Calico was an enthusiastic, open-minded, athletic, and fiercely independent woman who was passionate about her place in her own world. Her family and friends knew her as fiercely independent. Her inexplicable, unsolved disappearance in the late morning hours of September 20th, 1988, cut short her deep-rooted connection with exploration and self-discovery, as well as her inclination to engage with the arts and make a positive impact on her peers. This left everyone who knew her in Belen, New Mexico, and the entire country at large, searching for answers in a sea of evidence that left us all feeling drowned in doubt. This is a review of Tara Calico's disappearance and the odd Polaroid found in Port St. Joe, Florida, which may or may not provide a window into her destiny, in the hopes of offering more significant reasoning based upon visible evidence and situational analysis. On February 28, 1969, Tara Calico was born in New Mexico, the country of enchantment in the everyday world, to parents David and Patty Calico. Growing up, Tara was an active child who enjoyed spending time in nature with her brothers and friends. Tara's parents split when she was a child, but she stayed with Patty after she remarried and relocated to Belen, a typical New Mexico suburb. The principal seat of Valencia County, New Mexico is Belen, which derives its name from the Spanish equivalent of the fabled biblical town of Bethlehem. It serves as the transit center for the larger Valencia region and is mostly populated by Catholics and Christians. The Dole family thought that raising Tara and her siblings, Michelle and Chris, in Belen would be the ideal choice. It was all quite charming, with not a grudge or concern in the world. It's a location that has been compared to, quote, Small-town America, where everyone knows everyone looks out for everyone, and nobody is safe. Ranching served as the primary economic engine of the area, and its hospitable terrain provided a multitude of recreational opportunities. This meant Tara could explore her curiosity without worrying about any negative repercussions, making it the ideal setting for her. Tara was adored by both her close friends and fellow students in her high school class as she approached adolescence and early adulthood. They characterized her as a bright, athletic, and naturally kind person who lacked the typical child compassion. Her professors recognized her unwavering duty and exceptional organizing skills, which would come to light following her disappearance. She was loved by her classmates and held in great regard by them. Tara's friend, Melinda Esquivel, characterized her as a friend to everyone in a narrative. Melinda had no one else in the marching band to confide in or spend out with when she joined in high school. Despite not knowing anything about the new girl, Tara welcomed Melinda into her group of friends when she noticed her sitting by herself one day. This was a selfless gesture that improved the environment for her peers and left Melinda with a memory that lingered for a long time. Tara chose to pursue psychology in college after high school since it has always piqued her interest. She decided on the Valencia branch of the University of New Mexico, which was also Melinda's top option. The two would often visit one another and converse during their free time. Around this same period, Tara began dating Jack Cole, a popular student athlete and captain of their football team from their previous high school. Soon after graduating, the two met at a social gathering with friends they shared, and they quickly became romantically involved. They frequently continued dating while dating, and they frequently spoke about exploring the states and the nation together. As an avid outdoor enthusiast and religious biker, Tara's favored way of life was this one. Tragically, it was also the first domino to fall. When Belen, New Mexico saw its ideal American hamlet forever changed on September 20th, 1988, it became a mysterious, tragic, and contentious place. Tuesday, September 20th, 1988, in the wee hours of the morning, about 9 in the morning, Tara Calico gets out of bed and arranges her clothes and school books on her bed. She gets ready to ride her bicycle down New Mexico State Road 47, a regular route that she and her mother, Patty, frequent, leaving her house in Belen, New Mexico. Currently, though, Patty no longer rides with her daughter since she believes a driver was following her while they were out on a drive. Tara declines her suggestion to ride with a hidden mace on her person. Tara inquires after 9:15 a.m. at some point. If Tara isn't back by noon, she asks Patty to come pick her up along the highway sometime after 9:15 a.m. When Patty questions her about it, Tara says she's planning to play tennis with her ex-boyfriend at 12:30 that day and then go to college classes at 3:30. Since Tara's own bike tire is flat, she rides her mother's 10-speed Pink Huffy brand bicycle out of the house at around 9:30 a.m. In addition, the neon bike had easily identifiable yellow sidewalls and control cables. Tara Calico's final verified communication with her friends or family would be this. Tara bikes the about 17 miles to the typical route, the southern railroad tracks outside of town, during the next 2 hours from 9:30 a.m. to 11:15 a.m. She turns around to begin the travel home so she can get ready for her tennis date after the ride appears to go smoothly. Around 11:30 a.m., two anonymous ranch hands spot Tara pedaling the pink bicycle north on State Route 47 towards her home. At 11:45 a.m., almost 15 minutes later, three guys are driving on the 47's opposite lane, heading south. Tara is riding her bicycle when they pass her on their way home from a hunting trip. But then, they see something really unsettling. A white pickup truck is following her extremely closely. They observe Tara is engrossed in music on her Walkman while wearing headphones, seemingly oblivious to the oncoming truck. Shortly after the second encounter, less than 5 miles from the Rio villages, a different car passing Tara in the south lane also notices the white truck following her. This driver says he saw that the suspicious truck was not driven by a lone person, but rather had several people inside. This marks Tara Calico's final verified sighting. Patty Doyle honors her promise and leaves to pick up Tara at her daughter's request 5 minutes past noon. She follows Route 47, going up and down the railroad tracks in both directions. but she doesn't see her daughter or the pink bike. Even though no one fits Tara's description, Patty calls a nearby hospital to ask if Tara had an accident and was admitted. Then, Patty gathers some of Tara's friends to assist with the search, but nothing is discovered. Eventually, they give up and dial the number for the Valencia County Sheriff's Office, which initiates a police search party. On September 21st, the search team finds a pair of bicycle tracks on the west side of Route 47, which is much closer to Tara's last sighting, 4 kilometers from the Rio villages. The bike trails exit off the side of the road onto a gentle shoulder and head off the highway approximately 100 yards in the distance. This new spot features a fresh oil slick and real wheel traces. From here, authorities follow a trail of tracks that takes them to the largest discovery they have made so far in the case. Tara's cassette recordings of the rock band Boston, the damaged front plastic window piece of the Walkman device, and empty beer cans strewn about. Law enforcement increases its search efforts along State Route 47 by twofold between September 21st and 23. The remnants of Tara's shattered Walkman are discovered by investigators on Saturday, September 24th, near the John F. Kennedy campground entrance at the foot of the Manzano Mountains. Only 20 miles separate the isolated, deserted region from the first finding. The Ventura County Sheriff's Office sent out over 300 air and ground searches to patrol the river and Manzo Mountains that same weekend, but they found nothing unusual and withdrew on Tuesday, September 27th. Authorities search for any and all witnesses to Tara's last bike trip on the 20th during the ensuing days and weeks. They locate 7 witnesses, 5 of whom say they saw Tara being followed by a white pickup truck. In an effort to extract more information, 4 of these people are even put under hypnosis, but no real information is obtained. In addition, law enforcement rules out other potential pieces of evidence, like a bicycle water bottle discovered in a neighboring yard, an uneven dirt patch beside Route 47, a link to Deborah Lancell's September 1985 disappearance, and 3 men discovered drinking beer in the rear of a pickup truck shortly after Tara vanished. In addition to their alibis, Tara's damaged Walkman was discovered next to empty beer cans identified as Old Milwaukee and Budweiser. 1 month later, on October 25th, lead investigator Sheriff Lawrence Romero informs the public that, according to sources, the white pickup vehicle was observed with 2 guys inside. They believe these men to be their primary suspects. The driver is reported to be between 35 and 45 years old, white, with red hair, 5 to 6 feet tall, weighing approximately 200 pounds, and, most intriguingly, having creases between his eyes and temples. The vehicle itself is portrayed as a white 19 to 19-year-old Ford pickup model, complete with chrome hubcaps, big tires, and the Ford logo in red glass letters that have been shattered. His license plate reads W by or Z, which is followed by the number 6. Once more, weeks pass, and hundreds of calls and hotline reports about the police announcement of the suspect vehicle come in. A few people are interviewed, but no one is arrested, and the case starts to sour. An unidentified woman from Port St. Joe, Florida, approaches police on June 15, 1989, bringing a Polaroid picture she discovered in a convenience store parking lot. The image shows a young adult girl and a little kid lying in the back of a van with duct tape covering their mouths and wrists. This Polaroid is shared all throughout the nation, and Patty Dole's family calls to let her know that Tara looks a lot like the girl in the unsettling photo. Patty agrees that the woman in the picture resembles her daughter and takes a plane to Florida to have a closer look. 2 further images of a young woman bound and gagged in a similar manner are turned into the authorities during the course of the following year. However, these images depict a different woman than the one in the Port St. Joe original. All 3 are thought to include images of Tara Calico, although none have ever been verified to do so. As a result, opinions on their legitimacy vary among government organizations and non-professional investigators. Tara Calico vanishes, and the case is still open after decades. Not much information about the crime is ever found, even after innumerable private contractors and detectives scour New Mexico incessantly. 20 years after that fatal morning, in September of 2008, Rene Rivera, the Ventura County Sheriff at the time, made a statement in which he claimed to have knowledge of Tara's kidnapping and murder. But the conclusion could only stay a theory in the absence of any bodies to exhume or incriminating proof. There were other theories making the rounds in addition to his, and while the case's supporters get weary of his strange admission, Tara's mystery continues to be covered. 6 distinct federal and local agents formed a task group in 2013 with the goal of reopening the investigation. However, more than 7 years later, nothing further about Tara Calico or her mother's neon pink Huffy bike has come to light. The strange Polaroid snapshot that a woman discovered at the Port St. Joe's convenience store in June 1989 usually comes to mind when those who are familiar with Tara Calico's disappearance think of her cold case. As was already said, the image seems to depict a young lady and a little child who are being held against their will and are locked in the back of a van with no identification or background information. The woman said that a white Toyota vehicle had really taken up residence in the parking space where the Polaroid had been discovered when she had arrived at the store and had left only moments before she had returned to the lot. The woman, who managed to get a quick look of the driver, described him as middle-aged, mustached, and most likely in his late 40s. My suspicions about the photo started to surface right away. The white van can very well be the one carrying the toddler and woman who are shackled in the picture. Is it this van that is the source? Could the abductor be the driver? Or is all of this just a joke? Not according to the local newscasters or the woman authorities. They immediately got to work on their investigation, sending the Polaroid to a current affair that was broadcast across the country. The link to Tara Calico is now available. After viewing a current affair, friends of the Dole family noticed that Tara looked a lot like the female subjects in the Port St. Joe photos. After calling Patty and John, they didn't think twice about looking at the photo. Patty gradually realized that the woman in the picture was her daughter. The most significant hint, according to her, was that Tara had suffered a leg injury in a vehicle accident when she was a young kid, leaving a scar down her leg. She also referred to a discolored streak down the bound woman's leg in the Polaroid. Furthermore, if one examines the picture more closely, they may see a book sitting next to the woman. Coincidentally, or perhaps not, Tara Calico's favorite book by one of her favorite authors was V.C. Andrews' My Sweet Audrina. Several authorities looked at Tara's case after investigators concluded there were enough similarities to merit expert analysis. Nevertheless, the outcomes of 3 thorough inspections were not decisive. Although Tara was identified as the bound woman by Scotland Yard, the Los Alamos National Laboratory disagreed, and the FBI was unable to reach a formal decision. There were many physical attributes that the critics could point out. First and foremost, Tara's facial characteristics weren't exactly the same as those of the chained woman. Both their general jawlines and eyebrow forms are noticeably different. Having stated that, we need to take into account the significant setup adjustments. Since that particular stock of film hadn't been created and released until the spring of 1989, the Polaroid could not have been taken earlier than May of that year. Tara must therefore be shown in the picture at least 7 months after her supposed kidnapping and disappearance. During that time, a lot of physical changes can occur, such as weight loss that affects the jawline and poor eyebrow upkeep and hygiene. Perhaps more significantly, though, is that the Polaroid scenario would entail months of stress, worry, and cramped quarters. Naturally, Tara's cosmetics and style will differ significantly from the studio-lit images that are commonly used to contrast her with the tied woman. Despite the fact that there are arguments on both sides of the issue, the Polaroid contains insufficient details to support a conclusion on Tara. Of course, the snapshot of Port St. Joe also reveals a whole other mystery. Equal attention should be paid to the young boy who is lying next to the chained woman. Many individuals in Belen, New Mexico, and the state at large speculated that the male subject in the Polaroid might have been Michael Henley, a small child who vanished 5 months before Tara in April 1988. While hunting with his father in New Mexico, he also vanished. One day, he had wandered out from the campsite and disappeared, leaving hunting crews empty-handed. Even though he didn't know Tara or the Dole family personally, he was most likely the bound boy because of his physical attributes and the consensus of the Henley family. It was unclear how or why they would be together. but given the prevalence of serial kidnappers in New Mexico, it wasn't impossible that they had been isolated from one another throughout the nation. Nevertheless, this idea was rendered obsolete when Michael's remains were discovered buried in the Zuni Mountains of New Mexico in June 1990, a year later. According to a forensic examination, Michael most likely perished from exposure in the outdoors after straying from the campsite, which was located 7 miles away from the excavation zone. The campsite was also about 75 miles from Tara's disappearance, but the connection to Tara vanished, and the bound youngster in the photo remained unidentified once Michael's fate was revealed. Just one more weird tale connected to the strangers in the enigmatic Port St. Joe Polaroid. Thousands of ideas were generated by the Polaroid controversy alone, but none were considered more likely than the one that came to light in 2008, according to law enforcement officials. Following an inquiry that spiraled out of control and years of dead ends, the Valencia County Sheriff at the time, Rene Rivera, claimed to have knowledge of Tara's fate on that September morning in 1988. On the 19th anniversary of Tara's disappearance, the Valencia County News Bulletin reported that 2 men, who were teenagers at the time, had discovered Tara riding her bike on the rural road that day and had received assistance in disposing of her body later. Rivera quoted this information. The 2 males were teasing Tara in the back of a pickup truck, hitting her bike, causing her to lose control and fall, kidnapping her, and then killing her when she threatened to call the police, according to his theory, which he continued to outline through a play-by-play of the morning's events. Rivera continued by saying that the lack of hard evidence, specifically Tara's body or burial site, made it impossible for him to follow up on the tips and apprehend those guilty. He did think it was probably still in Valencia County, though, and probably along those railroad tracks. Many people, including stepfather John Dole, were perplexed as to why Rivera would make the allegation in the first place, because he wouldn't even divulge the names he had in connection with the notion. In response, Rivera stated that he had made the declaration in the hopes that it would encourage the perpetrators or anybody with knowledge of Tara's final resting place to come forward and provide the Dole and Calico families with official closure. However, despite the sheriff's entreaties, nobody stepped forward, and his frantic conclusion did more harm than good. In light of this, Sheriff Rivera's theory does correspond with an occurrence that was noted and is currently part of the public record in Tara Calico's case files. A component of the materials includes an interview with Henry Brown, a resident of New Mexico who passed away a while ago from declining health. Frank Miffola, a sheriff deputy, conducted the interview, which some have characterized as more of a confession. Brown asked Miffola to do the interview particularly so that he could give his side of the Tara Calico tale. Unfortunately, there is no known date for this incident, but it is thought to have happened years after the disappearance. In the interview, Brown talks about his time spent hanging around with other teenagers in Valencia. Thanks for watching. He was influenced by a troublemaker named Lawrence Romero Jr., who happens to be the old sheriff's son. Lawrence Jr. stated, was a drug dealer who was interested in dating Tara Calico, but Brown claimed that Tara was seeing a man named Jeff Abita, so he was never given any consideration. Brown went on to remember that he was at a party in the basement of Lawrence Jr.'s trailer, attended by Lawrence Jr. and his other naughty buddies. Lawrence also told him that he and the other guys had killed Tara by raping her, hitting her on her bike, and so on. Brown was told by Lawrence Jr. that, at first, they had just thrown the body into some nearby bushes, but that they later moved her body to a plain pond after growing suspicious of the police searches and moving her body to the improvised trailer basement. It's funny to note that other people than Henry Brown told the authorities this same story. In 2013, Donald Dutcher, another individual, also told authorities that a suspect had confessed to him about their horrible crime, but he was unable to pinpoint the culprit's precise place on the body. Whether coincidence or not, by the time of the interviews, both Dutcher and Brown had passed away, thus neither of their accounts could be verified by Lawrence Jr. or his companions. Conspirators stated that a suicide note containing a confession to Tara's murder was found, and that Lawrence killed himself by shooting himself. However, Rivera made the dubious choice to not introduce it as evidence, even if it existed. The other culprits' identities were not mentioned in the case files either. But Bell, locals, and other people with knowledge of the case attested to the fact that the rightful suspects did in fact pass away before they could be identified and brought forward. Thus, the issue still stands. If this idea is correct, is the Valencia County Sheriff's Office covering up something, or is there really a lack of tangible proof preventing police from bringing it to the prosecutor's office? Naturally, the fact that the primary suspect is the son of a former sheriff raises serious red flags, and the ambiguity of a written confession adds to speculation. But it goes without saying that the two distinct interviews that provide the same account must be taken seriously. It's unfortunate that the suspects are no longer with us, and the length of time that has elapsed since Tara vanished does not augur well for an unidentified accomplice to arise out of the blue and divulge more information. However, it is consistent with several witness accounts of rowdy motorcyclists following Tara on her bike rides in a pickup truck. Some information is cumbersome, like the fact that Tara was seeing a man named Jeff rather than Jack Cole, a heroin dealer anyhow, and that he was the last person any of her friends could possibly imagine her seeing. However, the hypothesis provides a comprehensive explanation for why Tara's body was never found, stashed deep in the vast New Mexico wilderness and disregarded by those who could have found her. If this is accurate, it is a really heinous act of corruption and injustice. A fact, Tara Calico also the subject of many additional theories. Similar to any well-known missing persons case that is covered by national networks, law enforcement, and media outlets received several reports of potential sightings from ordinary citizens who claimed to have seen Tara either strolling freely or with questionable people. But following the Polaroid incident, the majority of these sightings occurred in Florida, most likely because to phenomenon bias. After learning that Tara was being kept captive someplace in the Sunshine States, people were far more inclined to accept that they had seen her. This was due to their desire to both play the hero in an enigma that would never end and to see a solution emerge from a possibility. They reasoned that Tara might have run away on her own, which would account for the disappearance of her bike and the breadcrumb path to nowhere left by her broken Walkman. However, taking into account her relationships, decent home life, and desire to complete her education, the hypothesis was nonsensical. Far cry from a plan to fade into the remote world, Tara had procedures in place to ensure she wouldn't get lost, and there were no warning indications of abandonment at all. Another well-known hypothesis said Tara was the victim of a crafty kidnapper, a serial killer with a deranged mind and a penchant for drawing attention to himself. This concept originated not just from the one Polaroid discovered at Port St. Joe's, but also from several images that were discovered by strangers and turned into Florida authorities. Together with the original photo, a second Polaroid showing a young woman who appears to be in agony and is gagged was found at a California construction site. The image was grainy and close up, but the woman looked a lot like Tara again, and the background fabric might have matched one from the Port St. Joe's Polaroid. The third image, which showed a woman strapped to an Amtrak sitting next to a man who appeared to be laughing, was from an unidentified place. Even fewer similarities were seen between this female and Tara, and the whole thing was thought to be manufactured. Investigators never gave it any thought. In an odd turn of events, another set of printed photos entered the case 20 years after the Polaroids were discovered. The Port St. Joe Police Department's Chief David Barnes received 2 letters from Albuquerque, New Mexico, stamped June 10th and August 10th, 2009. An image of a youngster with brown hair and a black Sharpie-drawn band of tape covering his mouth was found inside the first letter. The original unmodified photo of the same youngster is enclosed in the second envelope. The Star, a newspaper published in Port St. Joe, then received a third envelope on August 12th, 2 days later. Once more, it was postmarked August 10th in Albuquerque and included a different picture of a youngster with additional black Sharpie on his mouth. Although it's unclear if the lads were the same person in each mailing, their similar locations first made police think if they were related to Tara Calico's case. Sadly, the envelopes contained no letters that revealed identities or any other information at all. But perhaps most bizarre of all, These envelopes were found at the same time that a self-described psychic called Port St. Joe Police Department to discuss dreams she had of Tara dying and being buried in California after fleeing. She added that she had met a female at a strip club who introduced herself as Tara, but that girl had been found and misidentified. Theorists believe that the two instances are related, and that either the psychic caller was also the one who sent in the envelopes to get attention, or it was the work of a serial kidnapper pulling a Zodiac Killer-style practical joke on local law enforcement and media outlets. They think Tara was the girl in the Port St. Joe shot, and maybe the other Polaroids as well, and that she was abducted and taken around the county in the back of a van. Is it possible that the psychic was a good suspect? Many agencies dismissed it, labeling it a fake, but many doubt that the mounting circumstantial evidence is much more than a coincidence. We would like to make it clear that our conclusions regarding Tara Calico's unexplained disappearance are only logical conjecture based on facts, context, and factual subtext before disclosing our theory. We only have access to the same data that is shown in each video, and we make no effort to provide certainty or an expert guarantee regarding the conclusions we draw at the end. All we do is watch, investigate, and write. Though the Port St. Joe Polaroid has a striking resemblance to Tara Calico, we think that she was either never shot after her disappearance, or if she was, the photo never reached the hands of the authorities, unlike the three well-known images that did after 1989. It is, in fact, difficult, if not impossible, to believe Tara ever traveled east of the Dutcher. When information comes from several independent sources, it is more difficult to falsify the truth. This is especially true when the majority of the details fit the circumstances surrounding the case. Nonetheless, it is quite unsettling that despite having thorough knowledge of the crime, the police never followed through on this confirmation, claiming there was insufficient proof. Was there a major cover-up by the Valencia County Sheriff's Department? It is difficult to say for sure, but Valencia County is not in good shape given that the primary offender is the son of a former sheriff. Therefore, we think that Tara was being followed by a white pickup vehicle that was loaded with the suspects who would have killed her, taken her to a different location with her accomplices, or sent her running from the Rio neighborhood. Where Tara ended up, if she survived the kidnapping that morning, is as good a question as any, but it's likely that she died at the hands of those who started the crime and was buried somewhere that's practically impossible to pinpoint given the size of New Mexico's wastelands and the lack of resources to conduct extensive searches. With any luck, the FBI officers tasked with reopening Tara's case may uncover fresh information and perhaps even a live suspect. But in the meantime, the enigma is bound by the cold with a terrifying lack of clarity. While we wait, we will think about Tara not for the morning of September 20th, 1988, but for every second that preceded that terrible day. Her unwavering sensitivity and care for all people will live on in our memories. Her capacity to make everyone feel welcome, regardless of background, will live on in our memories. Her humanity and aspirations to prosper in a welcoming, distinct, and stimulating community will live on in our memories. Not because of a contentious Polaroid discovered in a parking lot 2,000 miles from her home, but rather because of the light Tara Calico shone on her neighborhood and everyone she loved. That is why we will remember her. Moving on to the next case. Darylyn Johnson. The case was horrifying because an innocent guy was on the verge of being executed without a warrant. For the better part of 2 decades, the unexplained death of Darylyn Johnson was believed to be solved. Nevertheless, in 2001, it tragically resurfaced as a cold case. On February 24, 1982, at 8 a.m., every school child in Nampa, Idaho had a normal day. Darylyn Johnson, then 9 years old, was observed that morning strolling 6 blocks from her home to Lincoln Elementary School. Sadly, she never made it there. Concerned friends and neighbors, in addition to her family, responded to her absence by organizing a widespread search for her around the city of Nampa. But 3 days later, a couple of fishermen in remote Canyon County discovered Darlene's body close to the Snake River, putting an end to the extensive search for her. An autopsy revealed that Darlene had suffered blunt force injuries to her head and torso in addition to being sexually raped. The cops also collected male hair and DNA from the crime scene. Charles Fain, 34, was detained in September almost immediately after it was suspected that he had killed Darylyn by rape. Charles Fain was arrested because of a hair sample he willingly gave to the police and because he lived a block away from the Johnson household. After being hauled into detention, Fain denied any involvement in Darlene's death. He also performed well on the polygraph exam. He passed the test and denied killing Darylyn Johnson, but he was nonetheless charged with her murder. Prosecutors raised the likelihood that Fain was the owner of a shoe trail found near Darylyn's body during his trial. Furthermore, 2 jail informants claimed to have heard Fain admitting to the crime. In exchange for their testimony, the 2 informants also received lower prison sentences. Fain refused to back down from his insistence that he was innocent in the face of mounting evidence. He stated that the neighborhood where Daryl was slain was 100 miles away from him. Despite the lack of strong evidence and trustworthy witnesses against Fain, the judge did not rule him out as a suspect based on the testimony of the other witnesses. The polygraph results of Charles Fain were admitted into evidence in court. Furthermore, there was not enough DNA evidence at the time to prove Fain's innocence. Fain was sentenced to die in March of 1984 after being found guilty on November 4, 1983. However, he was subsequently detained for almost 20 years. He was about 4 days away from being executed in 1991. Surprisingly, though, his execution date was rescheduled. 8 years later, in 1999, with a little more advanced DNA testing, it was confirmed that the hair DNA found on Darylyn Johnson's body really belonged to an unidentified male and not Fain. Fain was then immediately cleared. In August 1999, he was released from the maximum security institution located in Idaho. Detectives revived the investigation in 2019, after a few years had passed, and the following year, they identified David Dalrymple as a suspect through the application of genetic genealogy. His DNA matched the sample found at the crime scene, and he was 64 years old. For kidnapping and molesting a child in 2004, Dalrymple was already serving a life term. In January 2022, he was formally charged with Daryl Lynn Johnson's murder. He is presently incarcerated and may shortly be executed or given a second life sentence. Conversely, Charles Fain feels relieved that the offender has been apprehended and is content that he is no longer behind bars. In exchange for his 18 years of incarceration and his incorrect conviction, he received a payment of $400,000. With some of the money he got back after his erroneous conviction, Fain recently bought a truck for himself. Moving on to the next case. Daniel Linda Lagerlof. In 1969, Daniel Linda Lagerlof was born. In addition to directing motion pictures, he also oversaw a few Swedish TV shows. In 1997, Daniel tied the knot with Malin Lagerlof, his longtime partner. Together, they were parents to 3 kids. As a screenwriter, Mulaney frequently created scripts for her husband to helm. Daniel was hard at work researching a potential filming location in the Turpanen Nature Reserve on October 6, 2011. He never returned to his 3 children and wife. It's thought that big waves that were sweeping the region trapped Daniel on slick rocks, and he was pushed out to sea close to the sheer cliffs. There are no witnesses because he was by himself. Daniel Lint Lagerlof is still missing, as of this writing. Moving on to the next case. Antoinette Briley's babies. In 2003, a waste management employee in Stickney, Illinois, made a horrifying discovery. 2 infants' remains were discovered by the worker in a garbage truck's front lift pocket. Their hypoxia caused their death. They were found to have been disposed of in a garbage can in a Stickney lane, according to investigators. Investigators made progress, but they still didn't know who was behind the babies left in a garbage can. The case quickly became unsolved. Subsequently, in 2018, investigators had the notion to try using DNA technology to find relatives who had been abandoned. They identified Antoinette Briley, a 41-year-old Michigan woman, as the mother after doing DNA tests. She was taken into custody by police in December 2020 after a traffic stop. That's when she admitted to the crime. She told the investigators this. In the time, she was 24 years old, and Ned was the only one in her grandfather's house when she gave birth to the children in her bathtub. She was terrified for several minutes while the babies were sobbing. After that, she made the decision to pack them in a duffel bag and head to the hospital by car. But on the way, she stopped, took the babies out of the bag, and threw them in the garbage. After leaving the duffel bag behind, she returned to her grandfather's house, watched TV, and went to bed. Antoinette has a daughter, which the investigators took note of and ensured is secure. This piece of trash does not yet have an attorney on file and is being detained on a $15,000 bail. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Moving on to the next case. Christopher Alvin Daly. Christopher Alvin Daly, age 26, was a resident of Huntsville, Alabama. He was employed for a Hilton Hotel in Huntsville. He was last observed during a staff meeting on April 25, 1995. His family never got home, so they filed a missing persons report for him a whole day later. Two 17-year-olds called the police an hour before Christopher was reported missing after they found a body near a former logging road that had a single gunshot wound to the head. When Decatur Police Department investigators arrived on the site, they were able to identify the body as Christopher Daly's. About 4 miles distant, part of Christopher's automobile, his wallet, and his ID were discovered submerged in a river. The case quickly became cold despite a thorough investigation that turned up no suspects, witnesses, recovered weapons, or reasons. A man named Johnny Dwight Whited called the Decatur Police Department at Alp cracked the cold case on November 18, 2020. He declared his desire to come clean about killing Christopher Daly. Sean McAdam, a police detective, was first dubious since Johnny could not recall the year. Sean got together with Johnny and the other detectives to act out the scene. Johnny was able to demonstrate to them all that had occurred, including the location of Christopher's car's plunge into the river. Given his grave illness, Johnny informed him that he wished to confess right away. He expressed regret and apologized multiple times. But it's not a justification. Even so, he killed someone, and he ought to have stepped forward years ago. Christopher's relatives were made aware. They appreciated the news. They thought there would never be a solution. Moving on to the next case. Blanca Arellano. Sometimes people act irrationally out of love and they don't regret it afterwards. However, in this instance, the victim we will speak about not only gave up her life for a one-sided love, but it also took it. Blanca Arellano, a 51-year-old Mexican, traveled 3,000 miles by plane from Mexico City to Lima, Peru on October 31st, 2022 with the intention of meeting 37-year-old Juan Pablo Villafuat, a Peruvian student studying human medicine and biotechnology at the Faustino Sanchez Carrion National University. The two were rumored to have met on a gaming hub and been dating virtually for a few months before Blanca, driven by excitement and heartbreak, flew to meet him in the hopes of finding real love. Her family claims that she frequently expressed her sentiments to Villafuat before departing for Peru and that she was content and at peace in their relationship. Blanca Arellano went missing after spending a week with Villafuat and told her niece that she had fallen in love with him. Her family was unable to get in touch with her for several weeks. When Blanca's niece Carla contacted Villafuat to find out why Ahanti had stopped answering calls and hadn't even called her family, she was the first to realize something wasn't right. When Kayla inquired about Blanca's well-being, Villafuat responded in a disrespectful manner, claiming that Blanca had chosen to leave him because he was unable to give her the opulent lifestyle she desired. He claimed that Blanca had grown tired of him and had gone to get an airline ticket home to Mexico. He told Blanca's family in their final conversation, "I hope she is doing well, but my role here is over. I say this with sadness because I have no idea what else is out there. She's probably running low on battery life or her phone is broken. I hope she returns home safely and I wish you well." In addition to trying to paint Blanca as a money-hungry gold digger who wasn't interested in love, he also attempted to dissuade her family from thinking that he was involved in any way in her abduction. Sometimes I wonder how murderers think. His assumption was that the Arellano family would overlook the reality that their daughter, aunt, and sister flew to meet him in person, only for her to disappear from sight a week after her arrival in his homeland. After Blanca remained silent for 2 weeks, her niece posted a need for assistance on Twitter. According to the post, "I never imagined I would be in this situation. However, I'm requesting your help today in order to share this message and locate one of the most significant and beloved people in my life." On Monday, November 7th, in Peru, my aunt Blanca Olivia Arellano Gutierrez vanished from sight. "We are afraid for our lives." She went on to say that she had questioned Villafort about her aunt's location, but he had never provided any useful information regarding the location of her hand Blanca. After this post went viral online and was shared numerous times, the Peruvian authorities decided to look into the situation. Sadly, on November 10th, they discovered an unsightly severed finger on the Ojo beach. There was still a silver ring on it, and it was claimed that the fingertips had been removed. The authorities discovered a faceless head and a ham a few hours later. At the end of a canal that empties onto the beach, they discovered a tozo the next day that was organ-free. Investigators quickly discovered that Villafort attends Carrier National University, Joseph Aosunu Sanchez, and that the canal runs in front of the university. Experts in forensics had also shown that the victim's face had been removed by a skilled surgeon. It is regrettable that although the majority of medical researchers work to save lives, some, like Villafrosi, work to end lives. Blanca's family verified that the ring on her finger belonged to her, and the investigators concluded that the remains of her body, discovered at sea, belonged to her. Villarfoli's apartment had traces of Blanca Arellano's blood all over it. In Villarfoli's chamber, investigators also discovered women's clothing, hair, and a Mexican flag. It has also been stated that days after Hawkins vanished, he uploaded images and videos of her on TikTok. Villafort was detained by police shortly after the finding on charges of femicide, organ trafficking, and human trafficking. Villafort is currently being held by the police while the inquiry is ongoing, despite his denials of involvement in the crime. Blanca Arellano went to find love at the hands of a demon, who ultimately killed her, severed her body, and invested her organs. It is heartbreaking that this happened. Let us keep the Arellano family in our prayers and thoughts. Moving on to the next case. Kim Marlene McVeigh. A woman's body was discovered on May 23, 1992, under a construction shed on North Memorial Drive, not far from Tulsa, Oklahoma. It didn't take long to identify her as Kim Marlene McVeigh, age 31. Kim had sustained a head wound. There was no DNA evidence and no known witnesses to the crime. The case fizzled out and no one came forward with any relevant information. However, witnesses have now come forward. They reported to the police that Tommy Edward Harris, a male, had admitted to them that he killed Kim. Kim was residing in the same house as Harris and a few other unidentified people. It was stated that the home was a well-known drug house. 7 days before her body was discovered on May 16, 1992, a guy entered the home to make amends for a botched transaction. This person requested a refund of his money. There was then a gunfight. This man grabbed Kim by the head and pulled her outdoors. Tommy Harris then received demands from the individual. Harris pulled a gun, striking Kim's left temple. Harris then howled her body into the house and covered her corpse with the shed in the backyard. The arrest of Tommy Harris occurred on May 14, 2020. Vic Rigolado, the Tulsa County Sheriff, described the situation as bittersweet, resentful of Kim McVeigh for having a family. Although they were unable to come today due to being out of state, they have been notified. Without a doubt, our thoughts are with them, and sweet in the sense that her family can finally have closure thanks to us. Years went into creating it. Ultimately, though, justice is served even though it sometimes moves slowly. Since then, the individual who broke into the house demanding money has passed away. After learning about the arrest, Kim's family, who was not present at the police briefing, has likewise not yet released a statement. Moving on to the next case. Kirsty Gordon. Nestled amid the parklands that separate North Adelaide from the city center lies the Adelaide Oval venue, a sports field that first opened in 1871. With a seating capacity of more than 53,000 people, it is a well-liked location for cricket competitions as well as rugby and football games. However, the Adelaide Oval abductions are arguably the most well-known incident for locals in Adelaide. The term used to describe the two small children who vanished during a football game in the 1970s. Joanne Ratcliffe, then 11 years old, left with her brother Frank, a family friend, and her parents, Les and Kathleen, on August 25, 1973. There was a football game between Norwood and North Adelaide on this day. Kirsty Gordon, age 4, was watching over her grandma from the maternal side next to the Ratcliffe household. Her parents, Greg and Christine Gordon, were visiting friends in the town of Renmark with their younger daughter, so they were not present. Every week, Joanne's family and Kirsty's shared a table and both had season passes. They thus got to know each other. Because of the high level of trust that existed between the two families, Joanne was permitted to go with Kirsty to the restroom that particular day. The Ratcliffes often forbade their kids from using the restroom during breaks or the final quarter, but on this particular day, they made an exception. Joanne and Kirsty went to the restroom at 3:45 p.m. Their folks started to get worried and started looking for them when they did not show up again after 15 minutes. Kathleen, Joanne's mother, tried to use the PA system at the venue to make an announcement, but she was turned down. After a second attempt, a report wasn't sent across the venue until 5 p.m. However, no one came forward and the girls stayed unaccounted for. Around 5:12 p.m., the missing was reported to the police. Authorities showed up on the spot without delay. After speaking with witnesses, they learned that the girls had been spotted multiple times during the 90 minutes between when they left for the restroom and when the announcements were made at the Oval. The two were initially observed as they tried to lure a stray cat that was skulking around with a few other kids. The second was when Kirsty was spotted being carried by an unidentified male. Joanne apparently looked upset during this time, punching and hitting the man while screaming at him. However, at the time, observers gave the occurrence no thought. They felt the youngster was just upset with her father and that it was a family issue. Joanne and Kirsty were last seen together on a bridge close to Adelaide Zoo. During a visit with her father, a 14-year-old girl recalled seeing a man with the two girls. She stated, "I saw a man approaching us quickly on the gravel path while carrying a small child," according to the investigation. A girl was racing to catch up with him and pounding him in the back as hard as she could while yelling at him to put her down. Set her down. And she was really angry. The girl described the man in the same way as the other people who had seen him inside the sports arena earlier. It's important to note that the poster claims a young male saw the girls last on Port Road, which is close to the North Adelaide train station. Private detectives surmised that the girls were removed from the vicinity from this station on a red hen train. Despite the high prominence and national attention this case garnered, the first inquiry quickly ran into trouble. A $5,000 prize was put up for information, but no significant leads materialized from the offer. It was difficult to accept that the girls had been abducted in broad daylight in front of 13,000 witnesses and that no one had identified the man responsible for the crime, but it seems that this is what happened. There has been conjecture in the years following the girls' disappearances that their case is connected to the notorious Australian case of the Beaumont children, in which 3 siblings, 9-year-old Jane, 7-year-old Anna, and 4-year-old Grant, vanished in the Adelaide region in 1966. Many of the suspects in the Beaumont case are also suspected in this one as a consequence of this potential connection. Witnesses in 1960 reported suspects in this one as well. Witnesses reported in 1966 that the Beaumont children were last seen with a tall, medium-built man with fair to light brown hair, a narrow face, and a tanned complexion. He looked like he was in his mid-30s. It's interesting to note that the description of the man saw with the Beaumont children and the man seen with Kirsty and Joanne before they vanished was similar in a police sketch. Bevan Spencer von Enum, a suspected serial killer who was found guilty in 1984 of killing Richard Kelvin, a 15-year-old Adelaide boy, is one of the suspects in the Beaumont case. On or around June 5, 1983, von Enum abducted Richard and held him captive for 5 weeks, torturing, drugging, and abusing him sexually. 7 weeks after his disappearance on July 24th in the vicinity of One Tree Hill, an Adelaide suburb, his body was discovered. Investigators nailed von Enum down because von Enum was one of the people with a prescription for the hypnotic sedative Mandrax, which was discovered in Richard's body. Von Enum's name also seemed familiar because he had been questioned over 3 young men's deaths and 1 young man's alleged sexual assault. The fibers recovered inside von Enum's house matched those on Richard's clothes. Derek Ernest Percy, a suspected serial killer who was linked to the Wanda Beach killings, is another suspect in the Beaumont investigation, an unresolved case involving the 1965 January deaths of 2 girls at Sydney's Wanda Beach. Percy was taken into custody in 1969 after killing 12-year-old Yvonne Tuohy. Additionally, he had made an effort to kidnap her buddy, an 11-year-old child who would later recognize Percy's car. Despite being caught by the police wiping blood off his clothes, Percy first denied any participation, but he ultimately guided them to the little girl's body. Investigators discovered journals detailing and illuminating Percy's numerous sexual obsessions, which raised the possibility that he was harboring pedophilic tendencies. After being declared innocent during his trial due to his insanity, Percy was placed under police custody without charge or prosecution. At 64, he passed away in 2013 from lung cancer. The most likely culprits for the Adelaide Oval kidnapping are thought to be the last 2 suspects in the case. The primary suspect in the 1970 killings of Susan and Judith McKay was Arthur Stanley Brown. The 2 girls, who were 5 and 7 years old, were abducted one morning while they were strolling 300 meters from their Townsville home to school. Their bodies were discovered near Anthill Creek 2 days later. Susan had suffered a knife wound to the chest, a strangulation, and sexual assault. Judith, her sister, had been sexually molested and killed by strangulation. Thanks for watching. Case from the beginning, yet he was able to live as a free man for almost 3 decades as a result of a poorly handled police investigation. Brown looks a lot like the police picture drawn during the incident at Adelaide Oval, where the man with the hat was observed carrying Kirsty and was struck by a distraught Joanne. Sue Laurie, a 14-year-old witness who saw the girls at the Adelaide Zoo, recognized Brown as the man who was with the girls on that particular day. 25 years after her last sighting, she identified him instantly when she saw him on a television show in 1998. Resuming her conversation with the under-investigation, Sue stated that she could visualize the culprit extremely well and knew right once that this man's face was the same one she had seen 25 years prior. Years later, I recognized him right away when I saw his portrait. That is the countenance. Although Brown frequently presented himself as a calm, courteous, and diligent worker who worked as a carpenter for the Queensland Department of Public Works, his relatives have fewer positive things to say about him. When I first met him, Merle Moss recalled, there was something different about him. I was just a young child. I was just not fond of him. Eventually, the family made it known that he had assaulted numerous young girls, but only the local girls. According to all reports, Brown was never reported to the authorities. Therefore, his horrifying, unlawful crimes went on for years with no consequences. Journalist Paula Donovan also said that he would commit his atrocities covertly. According to her, victims of child sex abuse frequently mention him wearing his maintenance uniform in their testimonies. He's the one at school who fixes stuff. One member of his family mentioned that he encouraged the pupils to address him as uncle. He would take a lot of his victims home with him, she continued, and attack them in the home he and his wife shared. Merle Moss remembered that somewhere on the property was a secret room he had. We discovered bottles of wine and a ton of literature that appeared to be actual accounts of women who had been raped and disfigured. We had no idea at the time that he was abusing young females in this way. Merle also recalled harboring misgivings over Brown and his potential involvement in the Townsville killings. Paula Donovan claims that when investigators arrived for him 28 years later, he was not taken aback. Brown was eventually charged with the offense in December of 1998. Around this same period, Sue Laurie recognized him from the news as the man she had seen with Joanne and Kirsty in 1973 as soon as she saw his face. Sadly, though, the jury was deadlocked during the trial. Despite the order for a retrial, Brown was deemed unfit for trial. He passed away in 2002 without ever having been found guilty of the killings in Townsville or the disappearances of Joanne and Kirsty. It's interesting to note that Stanley Arthur Hart, another Australian pedophile who is well known, resembled Brown in the police drawing. Until 2009, when a prisoner named Mark Trevor Marshall made a written confession stating that he and his grandfather, Hart, had been at the Adelaide Oval on the day that Joanne and Kirsty disappeared, the Adelaide Oval case had essentially come to a standstill. He asserts in the written article that his grandfather was the one who removed the kids from the event and then killed them. In 1999, Hart passed away. After obtaining a copy of the confession, journalist Brian Littlelay described it as horrifying and added that the girls had been kidnapped, taken into the country, and then slain. He expressed his opinion that Marshall might be speaking the truth because there were enough specifics in the notes. Interestingly, Littley doesn't feel this way alone. Private investigator and former police detective Bill Hayes has also said that there are details in there that make you believe he is knowledgeable about the subject. Susie, Joanne's sister, has also perused the notes and informed the investigators that an excessive amount of unquestionably true information and details are included. He has discovered information in there that he would not have known if he had not really met her. Hart allegedly had an interview after the 1973 event. Furthermore, Bill Hayes claims that a witness thinks he saw the two little girls at Hart's house a few days after they vanished. Authorities raided two of Hart's properties in 2015, one in Prospect and the other in Yetana. The Prospect house had an underground bunker which was filled in 1975 following the disappearances, but it was abandoned at the time, and Hart was the only one with access to the residence starting in 1973. It was his childhood residence. In the meantime, there were two wells on the Yatina property's grounds that had been dug up. Regretfully, neither property yielded anything noteworthy. In 2013, Joanne's sister requested that the police investigate the background of their family friend, Frank, who was present on the day the girls disappeared, and whether or not he was connected to the incident. She remembered that he was someone who was well versed in the customary actions of the girls during football games. Frank also left his seat for about 30 minutes before the girls vanished, according to Joanne's mother. Later, when the family started to worry that they were missing, he stayed seated and did not assist in the search. Frank's peculiar behavior had also been noticed by Kirsty's grandmother. Whether he was ever questioned about the disappearances is unknown. The case of Kirsty and Joanne remains unresolved, as they have never been discovered. On August 25, 1973, the two girls vanished from Adelaide Oval, a sporting facility. It was Joanne Ratcliffe's 11th birthday. She was a white girl with brown hair that was pulled back in pigtails at the time of her disappearance. Her clothes consisted of a black tank top, black jeans, white shoes, white socks, and a white shirt. Her build is medium. She was escorting 4-year-old Kirsty Gordon to the bathroom when she vanished. Kirsty is a white female with blue eyes and blonde shoulder-length hair. She had a light complexion with subtle freckles and stood 3 feet 4 inches tall when she vanished. She has 2 birthmarks, one below the hairline and one at the base of her spine, along with a small scar above the bridge of her nose. She had on a purple pullover, brown lace-up shoes, white pantyhose, and a white pleated skirt when she was last seen. Anyone who gives information leading to the remains discovery or information leading to a conviction is still eligible for a reward of up to $1,000. To report any information on this matter, call Crime Stoppers at 1800-333-DRIFT. Thanks for watching.